Our serious Christ followers have to figure out what it is. All of us who are serious Christ followers have to figure out what it is He wants us to do in this world. And it's a rather inexact science, as some of you know. Yesterday we talked about discovering your holy discontent. What do you see in this world that when you see it long enough and you hear the sounds and you're stirred in your spirit, you have that Popeye moment and you go, that's all I can stand. I can't stand no more. God, my life is available to you. If you want to use me in some way to rectify this situation, I'm yours. Second session, we learned that God says, well, what's in your hands? How did I wire you up? How can I use you? And you learned that whatever is in your hand, that your experiences, your gifts, your background, your talents, your intelligence, whatever that is, can be put to use in trying to rectify that situation that's causing the internal firestorm in you. But sooner or later, you got to actually make a move. During our volunteer series that Jim Miato told you about at the end of yesterday's session, for 4 weeks, the teaching pastors at Willow were challenging people to get involved in the work of God in the world. Get off the spectator stands. Get involved. And one of those days, one of those weekends, and if you use the Living Beyond Myself series, you'll have the opportunity to do this. One of those weekends that my associate pastor, Gene Apple, taught, we erected a diving board that went about 20 feet out into the crowd. And the imagery was, here's this diving board, and here's a person standing out on the end of it there. And we were saying in that weekend service that sooner or later, you got to jump in the pool. You got to take the dive. You got to get out of the boat. The imagery we just saw. You got to get out of the boat and start walking by faith in the direction where you do something in this broken world. During that series, I taught that once you take the dive, if this is the center, in other words, the perfect fit for where God wants you at this time in your life, the point I tried to make in my teaching part of the series that the first time an earnest Christ follower takes a dive into the pool of the world where God is trying to do His work, very rarely do you, upon your first dive, wind up in the sweet spot, right in the center of where you'll spend the rest of your life serving God as a leader. Usually you'll dive over here first, and you'll try the pool out there. You'll use your leadership gifts, you'll join a serving team, you'll leverage your talents or your abilities, you'll address some need in the world, and you'll do that for a time, and then you'll assess. Does this feel good? Do I feel the hand of God using me? Are others affirming me? Am I energized the longer I do this? Is fruit being born out of what I do? It's not uncommon at all for a person to do that for 6 months, a year, maybe more than that, and then for there to be the whisper of the Holy Spirit that says, I'm in the game now, I'm just probably not in exactly the right spot. So then you take another step of faith and you wind up over here and you try another area of serving. Maybe it's in a different arena, maybe in a different position, maybe addressing a little different need in the world, but you're trying to zone in a little bit more. Once you get over here, you experiment with this for several months or maybe even longer, and you say, is this a better fit for my gifts? Do I feel more comfortable on this particular team? Is going after this need in our world more energizing to me? Do I feel the hand of God using me even more? And after several of these kind of experiments, if you stick with it long enough, usually there comes the day when you make that move, and then after a time here, you find yourself saying, I believe I was born for this. I think I am dead center in the middle of what God wants me to do. That may mean that you're still in the marketplace, earning a living and pursuing your career there, but you have found something in this broken world that God can use you to remediate. It might be something in the church, might be in a parachurch ministry, it might be wherever. But when you do it, you feel the smile of God on your life. And you say, I was born for this. So many people stand on this diving board and never dive in. Drives me nuts. In the Living Beyond Myself series, we spent 4 weeks, as I said. I did the opening weekend and the closing weekend, and no kidding, I told you Willow's a high challenge environment. And I just said at the end of that series, you tell me, just talking to the Willow people who I love with all my heart, I said, you tell me what you're going to tell Christ when you meet him someday, why you didn't get in the game. Just tell me what you're going to tell him. You're too busy. Your career was too demanding. You like TV watching too much. You wanted to lower your golf score. I mean, you tell me what you're going to tell him if you don't live every day the rest of your life with a serving towel over your arm, emulating the servant nature of Jesus Christ and following his calling to do something to try to fix this broken world. And at the end of that 4-week series, as Jim told you yesterday, we added 2,000 volunteers to our volunteer ranks. And most of those volunteers would, if we could line them all up and interview them now, they would say, some of them would say, well, I've been in it for 6 months now, and I found a pretty good fit. I don't know if I'm going to be there forever. Some of those landed a little closer and maybe only have one more move to make. Some of them will have several more moves to make. But there will come a day when that whole new inflow of volunteers, if they work this process, listen to the Holy Spirit, keep experimenting, all 2,000 of them someday are going to say, I was born for this. I feel the hand of God using me to do something in this broken world, and it gives me energy and vitality, bounce in my step, a sense that my life means something. Okay, now let's throw a wrench in all this. Sometimes you wind up in exactly that place, and God does to you what he did to the Apostle Paul. He just turns the apple cart of your life upside down, and he goes, I got another pool for you. A whole different thing. Apostle Paul was a pastor at a church in Ephesus, and it was all going great. And then in Acts 20, the Spirit whispers to the Apostle Paul and says, I got another plan. I want you on the diving board again, and I want you to dive in, and this time, the center of where I want you to wind up is the city of Jerusalem, and bonds and afflictions wait you there. Bonds and afflictions wait you there. A very interesting thing happens in Acts chapter 21. Paul announces to his friends and the elders at the church that he's leaving, that he has to follow the Holy Spirit's whisper to go to a different arena. God wants to use him elsewhere. And a prophet, I don't know if you've ever read this passage, it's in Acts chapter 21. A prophet gathers some people around Paul and does again, it's kind of a weird thing, but he takes the belt off of Paul's robe or tunic, sits down on the ground, and he ties his own, the prophet, ties his own hands and feet with Paul's belt. And everyone's standing around watching this. And they're like, why are you doing that? And the guy says, Paul, I'm telling you one last time, if you follow the Holy Spirit to Jerusalem, as you say the Spirit's calling you there, you're going to wound up in chains. You're going to be in ropes and chains, in bondage the rest of your life. You're going to be arrested there. It's going to be terrible. So everyone's looking at Paul saying, stay here where you were, where it's all good. You know what Paul responds? He says, I'm willing not to just be in chains. I'm willing to die for the call of God in my life. And then the text says, and because Paul would not be dissuaded. I love that phrase. Because Paul would not be dissuaded, they prayed for him and sent him on his way. You know the kind of leader I want to be? I'm not there yet, but this is who I want to be. I want to be an undissuadable leader. When I hear the voice of God, and I know that He's spoken to me, even if He wants me to change pools, change positions, or whatever, I just want to be able to go, if that's what you want, God, I'll take chains. If I need to spill blood, you say the word, I'll do it. I'll get out of the boat, walk by faith toward where you want me to go. I will do it, believing you're a good God and you have good plans for me, and somehow, some way, this is going to bring honor and glory to you. I say it again, Christian leadership is not for the faint of heart. If you're in it because you want to be more comfortable and be in this clean Christian crowd where it's all sanitized and easy, and so you totally misunderstand the rules of engagement, because Christianity's for keeps. What's going on in this world is life and death, and what goes on after this world is eternal life and eternal death. The stakes are high enough for all of us, especially all of us leaders, to pay attention to the whispers of God, to take these dives into the pool, get involved in the process so we wind up in our sweet spot and be willing to move if He moves us. Now, having said all of that, I want to invite up two very, very close friends of mine. Please come up, Ken and John, and they're going to join me up here. And I don't have to spend a lot of time introducing these two gentlemen. They are known all over the world. Both of them are outstanding leaders. And I can't tell you how much these two individuals mean to me. I got to know Ken probably more than 15 years ago, and I'll get into that a little bit in an interview. But John Maxxuel is quite simply one of the most important people in my life. There wouldn't be a leadership summit if it weren't for John Maxxuel, because he invested in me and got me to start talking and writing about leadership. He's one of the closest friends I have, and whenever we go on the road together doing conferences or mentoring or something, my wife always says before I leave, you know, I don't have to pray that you're going to have a good couple days. You're going to be with John. And no one pumps me up like John does. He was at a party that I had at my house last night. I just watched him go from person to person, adding value, encouraging leaders. He's a walking encouragement machine. And I wish often in my leadership, I say to myself, what would John Maxxuel do in this situation? Because I'd like to be more like John. But anyway, these guys have sold millions of books on leadership. And most of you have heard them give talks. But I want to interview them on a little different level. And we've expanded the time in this session so that we can really get at some heart issues in the next few moments. So, Ken, I want to start with you for just a moment. And when I met you, you were at like on the crest of a wave of popularity. You had just completed writing The 1 Minute Manager. How many copies did that sell? Just, do you even recall?
They say about 16 million now, but it's kind of absurd.
Yeah. And just review, because some of us are of the younger generation in leadership and have not read that, but what was it in The 1 Minute Manager? What was the core content of that gripped people so much from a leadership perspective?
Well, I believe in the 80-20 rule, is that 80% of what you want from your people comes from about 20% of what you do. And the 1 Minute Manager was about 3 simple secrets that all of you can use in your homes, in the church, and community. First one is 1-minute goal setting. All good performance starts with clear goals. And so often I'll ask people, what do you do? What are your responsibilities? And then I'll talk to their boss and say, I was talking to John and Alice, what do they do? Then I compare the 2 lists, and I get funny little lists. And so people often get beaten up for not doing what they didn't know they were supposed to do in the first place. So be clear with your people on goals. The second thing is, once they're clear on what you want them to do, then wander around and see if you can catch them doing something right. And give them a 1-minute praising. You know, pat them on the back. How many people are sick and tired of all the compliments you've been getting at work. I mean, you just wish they'd lay off, you know. I mean, people just don't get it enough, you know. I see people who save letters 15 years in their pocket, one praising letter they got. So that is so important. And then what if somebody makes a mistake? You have two choices with a mistake. If they're a learner, you need to redirect them back to what the goal is and maybe even coach them a little bit. If they know better and it's just an attitude problem, then the third secret was the 1-minute reprimand, which is you tell them what they did wrong, how you feel about it. You know, you didn't get your report in on time on Friday, and, you know, I'm really upset about that. But you always end a reprimand with a reaffirmation, because people are all right. It's just their behavior's a problem sometimes. And so what gripped people, I think, Bill, was the simplicity of it, and yet the power of it. So many people say, why did I write about that? I mean, that's just so simple. So be clear with people on their goals and see if you can catch them doing something right, and then if they get off base, either redirect them or reprimand them. But always remember they're beautiful. Their behavior might be a problem.
Yeah, I've often said to pastors that so few staff members on church staffs really know exactly what you're expecting them to do. Like if you have 20 people on your staff and you just said, okay, come into my office one by one and tell me crisply, succinctly, exactly what it is that you're expecting from me. Very, very few church staff members, in my view, could say that, are really clear on what is expected of them. And therefore, the evaluation process gets all mucked up because you're evaluating on, are you a nice person or not on, are you doing what it is we're both expecting or anticipating you doing. And the whole reprimand or redirect process gets fuzzy. So just that, if you've never read the 1-Minute Manager, take your staff through it again and just say, do we all know what we're supposed to be doing? Very important. Then, Ken, you popularized another concept which we've used widely around Willow, and it's called situational leadership. Some of the folks here know about it. Many probably don't. Just give us the 1-minute version of situational leadership.
What situational leadership basically says is there's no one best leadership style. It depends on what the development level of the person you're dealing with. So if you're dealing with an enthusiastic beginner, you say, would you do this? Would you run this ministry? And the person's never done it before, and they say, yeah, I'd love to do that. If you delegate to them and leave them, they will fail with vigor, you know, because they don't know what they're doing, see? Delegating is only appropriate for a self-directed achiever, somebody who has experience doing it and all that kind of thing. If somebody's an enthusiastic beginner, you got to direct them. You got to tell them what to do, how to do it, when to do it, where to do it, work with them really closely. And what situational leadership does is it shows that we all go through 4 stages of development, from enthusiastic beginner to very often disillusioned learner. You know, this is more tough than we thought. And you need to coach them. You need to give them both directions.
In other words, they make a mistake.
Yep.
You've told them how to do it, but they've done it for a little while now and had some hardships and made some mistakes.
Yeah, and see, haven't you all realized it's much tougher to do something than you anticipated? You're all excited, boy, I love that assignment. And then you have to deal with people, you know, and you have to do things. So, you know, why did I accept this, you know, and all. And if you are not around to continue to direct them, but also now give them some tender, loving care, you'll lose them. Disillusioned learners bolt. And if you can coach them through disillusionment, they get to what we call the capable but cautious performer, which means that they got the skills, but they might lack some confidence. And so all you got to do is just be around to pat them on the back. Don't take the ball away from them, but encourage them and all. And so it's a really powerful concept. We first came out with it in 1967. The average life space of a leadership theory in the marketplace is 5 to 7 years. This year, worldwide, situational leadership is used more than ever before. American Express, Wells Fargo, Pfizer, you name them. And why? Well, I'll tell when we talk later, because Jesus did it, you know. I mean, he just kind of lent me the theory. But
Ken, I remember calling Ken one time and describing an issue that I had going here at Willow, and he listened to it very, patiently. And I said, I think I hired this person and trained them, and now we're in the delegation phase. He listened, and he says, Bill, there's a difference between delegation and total abdication, which is my style. I tend to get to a point where I delegate and let someone run, and just, if they're doing well, I might not check back with them for years. And Ken reminded me, there's a big difference between delegation and total abdication. And so anyway, he has been just such a help to me and to people all over the world on these kind of leadership principles. But an interesting thing happened along the way after I got to know Ken, and that is this high-flying business guru guy wound up becoming a Christian. And why don't you tell them just briefly how that happened?
Well, some people become Christians because they're real hurting. I became a Christian and started thinking about God because the one-minute manager was so ridiculously successful that I was having a hard time taking credit for it. Spencer Johnson and I had written this. We were a couple of unknown guys from California. Bang, all of a sudden, we're all over the place. And my mother had always said to me, don't think you're better than anybody else. And then she said, but don't let anybody else think they're better than you. But what happened to me is that, I've always thought, even though I had turned my back on the Lord and churches and all that, is that when something is so ridiculous, somehow God was involved. And so people started saying to me, why do you think this is so successful? And I said, I think God's involved, And the minute you open yourself to God, He starts sending people in your life. I get a call from our publisher, would I write a book with Norman Vincent Peale? And I said, is he still alive? My parents had gone to his church before I was born, and they said, not only is he alive, he's fabulous. And I met Norman, he was 86, and we wrote a book called The Power of Ethical Management, Integrity Pays together. And Norman said to me, Ken, Lord's always had you on His team, you just haven't suited up yet. And then the Lord put Bob Buford in my life, and Buford started to push on me, and then He introduced me to you. And see, as a humanist, I always hated the concept of original sin. I thought, what an awful thing. Why not original potentiality? Why can't you be good or bad depending on what you do, see? And then sin, calling somebody a sinner, I hated labels. And so I said to Buford, why labels? Why original? And he said to me, Ken, do you think you're as good as God? And I said, obviously not. If there is a God, that's perfection. And he said, okay, Ken, let's give God 100, and we'll give axe murderers 5. Mother Teresa was alive then. She's a pretty good gal. Why don't we give her 95? And Ken, you're not bad. You're trying to help people. I'll give you a 75. He said, the neat thing about Christianity is the Lord sent Jesus down to make up the difference between you and 100. And I went, whoa. Isn't that a much better way to do it? If you call somebody a sinner, they get their back up. But if you say to them, where are you on a 1 to 100 scale? I don't know anybody who says they're going to be at 100. And then Bob said, don't get too excited, Ken, because I got to tell you the whole deal is some people don't like it that the axe murderer gets the same opportunity as Mother Teresa, because it's not about deeds, it's about faith and belief. And then he said, I don't know a great deal, so he turned me over to Bill, and I didn't know Haybos from a hole in the ground. And except that people said, you get in his jaws, you're really in trouble. And but Bill really pushed me and really said that the big difference between religion and Christianity is how it's spelled. That religion is do, and there's whole to-do lists that you're supposed to do, and most people give up because they never know when enough is enough. And he said Christianity is spelled done. And these guys, see, I'm a simple type. You guys really helped me see about Jesus in a way that I had never thought before. But I opened myself up because I was so ridiculously successful. I was embarrassed by the whole thing, and that's when I let God in, and that's why Bill's so important to me, and Bob and Norman. And
so then I had the incredible privilege of kind of discipling Ken, training him up over the telephone mostly, or when we would speak at the same things. helped him get planted in a church out by where he lives. And he started giving sermons periodically. Remember that? You'd call me on a Saturday night. I need a good one. I said, like, for when? He'd say, for tomorrow morning. I'm like, oh, man. But anyway, I had the delight of watching him grow up in God, and I watched God change Ken's life. After he'd first become a Christian, I would have him come speak to our leaders and at Willow and do all of his leadership training stuff, and I'd be down in the front row praying that he wouldn't cuss, because you used to be a little colorful in the vocabulary department.
In the old days, I had gutter gums.
One time we had our whole leadership corps up at a retreat, and he had made it through this whole session, got right to the end, and again, I was sweat pouring down me, don't cuss. And right at the end, he says, did you hear the one about this guy who goes into a bar? And I'm like, no. So we had a little forgiving to do after that. But then, Ken, somewhere along the way, you started studying Jesus Christ, not just as the great theologian and the great teacher and moral example. You started to line Jesus of Nazareth up against the greatest leaders of the world, and you concluded, again, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you concluded he was at least the equal of or better than any leader in human history. Tell us about that.
No, he's the greatest. You know, what happened is, being a behavioral scientist, when I started to read the Bible, I went right to Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and Acts, because I want to know what the man did. I was looking for the red print. And what I found is that everything I ever taught, everything I ever wrote about, Jesus did, and he did it perfectly and way beyond what I could have ever described. I mean, Bill talked about the difference between abdication and delegation. I mean, I would read things and I'd say, man, this guy was unbelievable. Like, take the end of Matthew, after he says to the disciples, go and make disciples of all nations and all. The last line of Matthew is the most incredible example of delegation. He didn't say, you know, I'm out of here. What did he say? But remember, I will be with you until the end of the age. You know, I mean, he's always there for us if we're in trouble. I mean, that's what delegation you want to keep in the information loop. Abdication is you turn your back, you don't care what's going on. And when you abdicate, usually, and something's wrong, you seagull in, you know, you fly in, make a lot of noise, dump on everybody, and fly out. But
you used to say that differently, too.
Jesus never does that to us. He's always there for us. I mean, I try to look at Jesus as my friend. And okay, friend, you know, should I do? But not only was he a one-minute manager, you know, I mean, he was real clear on goals, you know, and I remember Bob Schuler said, Blanchard, you didn't invent, and Tom Peters, management by wandering around. He said Jesus did. He wandered from one little town to another little town. If anybody did anything right, he'd praise them, he'd heal them. He did praisings all the time. And then if people were out of whack, he wasn't afraid to redirect them. You know, Peter, get behind me. He wasn't afraid to reprimand people. I mean, and so he was a situational leader. What did he do in the first commission? He tells them what to wear, where to stay, what to do. Why? Because they were enthusiastic beginners. And then at the end of Matthew, he delegates to them. And what happens in Acts? Peter saves a big crowd. Here's a guy who didn't know anything. And he said, I'm going to make you fishers of men. I mean, so what I got excited about is that Jesus is the greatest leadership role model of all time. But the problem is I didn't see anybody talking about him as a great leadership role model in the churches and divinity schools and all that kind of thing. And so suddenly, you know, you talk about, what is your holy discontent? What my holy discontent was, I couldn't believe that all these Christians who had the greatest leadership role model weren't using them. I mean, churches weren't run, you know, by servant leaders, you know. Christians in business weren't operating as servant leaders, you know. I mean, he was so clear, his mandate. He said, not so with you. Really clear, you know. The Gentiles lord power over. They use authority. Not so with you. You know, even I have come to serve, not to be served. And so that's really become my passion, Bill.
So now Ken is putting on seminars all over the world for businesses, corporations, government, churches. The seminars are called Lead Like Jesus, correct? Mm-hmm. And you and I did one together about a year ago, and they're just fabulous. And I sat again in the front row while Ken was up speaking at this all-day Lead Like Jesus seminar, and I'm not kidding you, tears are just coming down my cheeks because I knew this guy before he knew Christ. And I've watched him grow, and I've watched the Holy Spirit take him from just doing talks for businesses, that's all, to where now he's giving his life to Lead Like Jesus seminars for people of all kinds. And I just never tire of watching God transform a human life. And that's what's happened here. So, man. Thanks.
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to ask Ken to just go on hold for a second, and I want to talk to Jonh because Jonh has a story that's almost the reverse, and I want you to hear it. Now, Jonh, almost everyone knows you were a pastor for how many years?
25 wonderful years.
And when did you first get the idea that God was going to call you to be a pastor?
Oh, when I was 17 years of age, I felt a definite call to go into pastoral ministry and shared it with my family and with my friends and made preparation to get ready for that ministry for the rest of my life. I felt it would truly be, I really felt I'd be a pastor, Bill, for all of my life.
And you were for 25 years,
Correct.
And your most recent pastorate was in San Diego at a Skyline
Correct.
Wesleyan Church, a fantastic church, and you invited me out several times, and we had a ball there. But along the way, you started writing books about leadership.
Correct.
And they started to gain a hearing beyond just the church world.
Well, you know, I wrote really books on leadership for pastors because, the good news is we all had our theology training, but the bad news is, we could lead somebody to heaven, but we couldn't lead a congregation. And I said, we got to start training leaders and really help raise up leaders because everything rises and falls on leadership. So I really wrote books in the beginning just to help pastors lead. And then they would bring their lay people to the conferences, business lay people, and they would hear it, and then it just snuck out. I mean, it wasn't anything I planned at all. In fact, I was as surprised as anybody. And one day, one of my publishers said, Jonh, do you realize over half of your books are sold in the secular corporate community, not in the Christian community? And I said, you've got to be kidding me. And then I started, people started asking me if I would come and speak for them in the corporate setting.
Okay, and that began a transition, and I remember because you called me and we talked about it many times on the phone. You started to get one of those scary callings that maybe God was actually doing the unthinkable, calling you out of pastoral leadership into the business world. Tell us about that.
Well, it was very scary because I was totally uncomfortable in that community because I was a pastor. That's all I've ever done. So I wasn't a business person, and all of a sudden they're saying, would you come and speak to our companies? And I was way, way, way out of my comfort zone. And just a little side thing for a moment, I have discovered as a leader that we're always going to be out of our comfort zone. If we're growing, I promise you, we're going to constantly be stretching. And so we're always going to be out of our comfort zone, but I would also encourage you to know your spiritual gifts because here's what I believe. I believe that it's okay for us to be out of our comfort zone. In fact, I think that's a good sign because if we're out of our comfort zone, it means we're growing, but never get out of your gift zone. You see, if I'm out of my comfort zone, it's probably because I'm obeying God and really stretching as a person, as a leader. But even though I was going from one kind of a community to another kind of community, Bill, I was still going to be teaching leadership. But where I was really uncomfortable is I kept saying to myself, I'm not sure I have anything to offer these people. This is the corporate community. This businessmen, women, and they probably knew more about leadership than me. And I was really hesitant. And I had a life-changing moment when I was at the beginning of this. I was speaking to a large lumber broker company, and it was a secular company. And I taught all day about leadership. And I finished the day. I felt it was a good day, and we were doing a little Q&A at the end of the day, and one of the senior vice presidents raised his hand, and he said, John, he said, I've got a question to ask you. He said, your leadership stuff is different than what we're used to hearing. It's kind of fresh. He said, where did you get your material? I didn't want to tell him. I mean, I thought, I'm going to get unmasked here. You know what I'm saying? I'm just trying to add value to this organization. And besides, I knew that if I really told them where I got my material, they really didn't want to know anyway. So I told him, I said, well, trust me on this. You don't want to know. and he raised his hand again. I said, no. He said, I'm very serious about this. He said, I really would like you to answer the question, where did you get your leadership material? And I said, well, I'm really serious. You don't want to know. And by this time now, everybody's got their hands. Where'd you get your stuff? Where'd you get your stuff? And so finally I said, everything I know about leadership, I learned from the Bible. And I mean, it just got absolutely stone quiet. And so to break the ice, I said, I told you didn't want to know. Don't blame me. You asked, And then Bill, what happened, and this is the way I just rejoice, this is the way God works. I noticed it had a cocktail hour coming up about 6:30. I said, I'll be down there. And I said, I just want you to know, if you want to know anything about God or the Bible, I'll just hang. And you can come up and you can ask any question privately you'd like to ask, and I'll do my best to answer it for you. I went down there, and for that hour, I had people around me continually asking questions. One guy was from Nevada whose marriage was on the rocks, and he said, can I talk to you 5 minutes in confidence? And I shared with him a couple things, of which he wrote me a wonderful letter a few weeks later, and he and his wife decided to really try to make their marriage go. And I walked out of that cocktail hour that evening, and it was one of the greatest inward senses of God's approval on my life. And I thought, boy, when I started the pastoral ministry, I didn't know that my highlight would be a cocktail hour. But it was at that time I began to say, okay, God, I really sensed your approval on this, so I'll start walking. And I'm not really sure where that leads me. And just one more thought, and then I'll back to you, Fred. Bonhoeffer said something that really helped me during this phase of being uncomfortable as a leader, stretching out of my comfort zone. He said that as a follower of Christ, we're not always sure where we're going, but we are sure that we're following Jesus. And that really meant a lot to me, because as I was on that journey, I wasn't really sure where it was going to lead me, but I was really sure that in my heart, I really wanted just to obey God. And I was willing to do that. And, of course, that causes a lot of questions, and sometimes it causes a lot of criticism, and that's another story. But I just think that I just want to encourage you just for a moment and say that if you're in some kind of a transition period in your life as a leader, you may not always be able to give the answer with clarity exactly where you're going, but as long as you know you're really following Christ, it's kind of like Peter getting out of the boat. You're safe. You're safe in territory you don't know if you really know who you're following. And that really encouraged me, Bill, to kind of pursue where I am today.
Now, one of the things that I've always appreciated about John's leadership is how well he speaks and writes about the people side of leadership. Some of us think if we come up with the right strategy, if we have exactly the right ministry paradigm, if we can get all our ducks in a row from a strategic standpoint, well, then it'll all go well, either in church work or any other kind of work. And John, one of your latest books, anyway, you talk about 25 ways of winning with people. And John is just a master at this, and I hope I'm not catching you off guard, but just off the top of your head, your book talks about 25 ways of winning with people. What are some ways that all of us who are leaders can win with people, just every single day, regardless of strategy?
Well, okay, just get ready to write them down. I'll give you 25. No, I'm not going to do that. First of all, I think that the foundation of leadership is relationships. Let me put it this way. People will not go along with you if they cannot get along with you. That's just a fact. How many of you know people who have probably very good leadership skills, but they're poor in relationship skills? And it's kind of like, I know they know where they're going, but I don't want to take the trip with them. We all understand that. I mean, and we all know. How many of you know at least one person that's been a leader that you've had to follow before that was very difficult relationally? Would you raise your hand, huh? Sure. All of our sites. I mean, thousands. Now let me ask you another question. How many of you are seated beside that person right now? Well, we had a few flunk that one, I can tell you. The first question was a relationship question. The second was an IQ question. And yeah, the 25 Ways to Win with People, Bill, as you know, it's just a book that it has practical behaviors. And the reason I did it is because I thought, if winning with people and relationships is so important, why not just spell it out for people, things that they can do that will help them relationally connect with them. So, like, for example, one of them is add value to people. Now, this is huge in my life. Every day, this has been a practice for many, many years. Every day, I ask myself a question: who am I going to be with, and how can I add value to that person? And to add value to people, we have to do three very basic, simple things. Number one, we have to value people. It's impossible to add value to someone that we do not value. In fact, if we don't value people, what we'll do is, instead of motivating them and leading them as we should as a leader, we'll manipulate them. And when I manipulate you, I move you for my advantage. When I motivate you, I move you for mutual advantage. And leaders are always moving people, but they're doing it for the right reason. And I've always found, and I bet Ken, Bill, you found this true, that when a leader gets out of line with people, it's because they begin to devalue the people they're leading. I have a nonprofit organization equipped that's training 1 million Christian leaders internationally, and when you get into developing countries, you find this is just so many times a horrendous problem. So if I'm going to add value to people, I have to value people first of all. Number two, I have to know and relate to what they value. What that means is, leaders are listeners. I have to listen. I have to walk slowly through the halls, through the crowd. When Bill and I are together, honestly, and Bill knows this, one of the things I do is when I'm with him is I ask myself, how can I add value to him? And the only way I can know how to add value to Bill or how to add value to you, Ken, is to know about you. So I've got to hear your story. I've got to know what you love, what your passion is, what your spiritual gifts are. I have to know as much as I can, because to add value to somebody has the thought and the idea that I can only add value to you if I can get to where you relate and what you connect with and what you love and what you're comfortable with. So to add value to people, I've got to value people. I've got to know and relate to what other people value. And thirdly, I have to make myself more valuable. I think one of the greatest mistakes as leaders we make is we get a leadership position and we think we've arrived. And we stop growing, we stop learning, we stop stretching. And pretty soon we've given our people all that we know. You cannot give what you do not have. And leaders are not only listeners, they're learners. And they just have an appetite to grow and learn. Why? Because they want to improve themselves. Because as they raise themselves and improve themselves, then of course they can raise others. So one of the 25, is just how to add value to people. And those are simple things that again, I think really connect with others, because the 25 ways to add value to people. Can I give another one? Is it okay?
Yes, but before you jump into that, I want to just say I've never known another human being who lives out his writings on that particular point more than John Maxxuel. John adds value to my life every single interaction we have. And I talk about this. I've told him that privately. And I've said, you do that so powerfully that every time I'm with John, when I come back to church, when I'm ever in a leadership environment, I walk into rooms differently. I walk into rooms and I actually have it in my mind saying, there's 4 people in this room. How can I add value to them before they leave my office? What words can I say? How can I listen? How can I build into them in some way? How can I make sure that when they leave my presence, they were glad they were in it, and they walk a little taller, or they feel a little more confident or something? Leaders, this is something we have to get better at. And we can get better at it. But to have the mindset in every situation before this person leaves my presence, I'm going to add value to them. Hey, John, you have, I don't want to catch you off guard, but you have like a 30-second rule, or what is that?
Well, it's like everything else in my life, very simple. Somebody asked me one time, said, John, why is your stuff so simple? I said, because I'm so simple. I mean, this is not complicated. 30-second rule is something I taught all of my staff when I was a pastor. I teach people in my organizations this, and that is the first 30 seconds you're with a person, say something affirming to that person about that person. Now, obviously, I'm talking about sincerity. You got to be authentic. I'm not talking about just schmoozing. I'm just talking about the fact that, again, if you study people, you'll find things within people that brings great value. And so last night when I was over at your house, I was really doing the 30-second rule. I was just walking around the rooms telling people how much I appreciated who they were and what they were doing, and try again to say something in a way that would add value to who they are. And you know, when the pastor from Soweto yesterday spoke, and he talked about this, so beautiful. He talked about the fact that when the water was turned to wine, the disciples had to fill up the jars first, and then the Lord did His work. Or when the loaves and fish, you know, what the illustration we had on the skit today. You go get what you have, and then I'll do the work. And so I told the pastor, I said, I just want you to know when he finished. I said, I just want you to know it's going to be huge in my life. And I showed him where I had written it down in my notes. And I said, this is something I'm going to really work on. Because what you taught me today was that if I just do my part first, then God adds that and makes up the difference. And I just have tried to make it a practice in my life, in behavior, and with people, to just be very attentive to what they say and be able to pull out of it something that they've said that really helps me, and then sincerely thank them for that. And I just know this, when somebody comes and thanks me for something that I've said or a book that I've written, it means a lot to me. And I just think a lot of times as leaders, we just kind of expect our people to follow us because we're the leader. And just kind of fall in line and just follow me, and it's because I said so. And I just think that the relational approach with people, whether it's adding value to people, the 30-second rule, or so many others that I talk about, I just think it's so key. And again, Ken, you've done this so wonderfully. And your affirmation, the 1-minute manager, that's all relational stuff. And I just want to say that in relationships, I just believe this. Leadership is influence. Nothing more, nothing less. And the person with the most influence at any given time in any given group for any given reason is the leader of that group. And the way that you gain influence is through the relationship channel with people. People will only be influenced by people that they know truly care for them and have their interest in heart. Did you want to say something on that?
Yeah, what John is saying is so important. If you remember, like if you're going to praise or acknowledge somebody, be sincere about it. And the way you're sincere is to be specific. You know, I used to try to teach that to my students when I was a college professor, you know, because some of them would come up, you know, trying to, you know, butter me up and say, oh, you're the greatest professor in the world and all that. And I'd say, I'm going to roll my pants up. It's too late to save my shoes, you know. You know, be specific if you could. But, you know, how many of you have caught your boss doing something right? You know, a lot of people say, I don't want to praise my boss. They'll think I'm buttering up. Not if you're specific. If you go into your boss and say, you know, I want to thank you for that report you put together after our last meeting. Boy, it was so helpful, and I was able to use it with my people. People appreciate that. People like to be acknowledged, but be specific. Feedback is the breakfast of champions.
Yeah. Ken, you bring up something interesting, and I'd like a comment from both of you on this. There is so little conversation in leadership circles about leading up, about how do you bring influence and relationship to people who have the power over you. And I think all of us are in situations. In my situation, I have a group of elders who are the final authority in this church. I'm a long way from being the final authority in this church. And how do I lead up and try to, in the right kind of ways, bless those people and inspire those people? Talk to us about leading up.
Well, I just came out with a book on that. It's called Self-Leadership, Situational Self-Leadership, How to Take Initiative When You Don't Have Power. And one of the things we teach people, if I was going to give you a nugget, the most powerful phrase you can learn to influence your boss is the phrase, I need. If you go to your boss and you say, I need just 5 minutes from you, or I need this and all, they will listen. Don't go in as a victim, you know, complaining and head down and all. Tell people what you need. And the worst you're going to do is break even. How many of you would take a bet that the worst you're going to do is break even? You're going to either win or break even. See, if you ask for what you need and they don't give it to you, you broke even. You know, I mean, because you didn't have it before. And some people are afraid to ask for what they need because if they get turned down, they think they're turning you down. The only person in the world that can turn you down is yourself. And so self-leadership is really being confident in yourself, but also asking for what you need. So that would be the big advice I would give from there.
That's good. And Ken, I'm writing a book on that same subject too. In fact,
Mine's out first, though.
Yeah. The first shall be last, and the last. In fact, this isn't the title. I almost called the book "Leading from the Middle of the Pack," and with the subtitle "Follow Me, I'm Right Behind You." Fact from that response, I think I'll change the title. But one of the things I talk about the fact is in leading up, which is so key because most of us are not at the top. So if we do not know how to lead up, we're in really deep weeds. And yet we have leadership responsibilities and sometimes privileges. Now, in leading up, what I've discovered is that the person that is above you, you really have to know what their interest is at heart and do your best to serve that interest. Because what I have discovered is the moment someone is leading at the top and they sense someone down there really cares about adding value to their lives with no other agenda but doing that. And again, this is a relationship vein. Leading up is all relationships, really. But the moment that they understand that if they can serve the interest of that person leading them, I'm not talking about kissing up. I'm talking about knowing the person above you in such a way that you really can add value to that individual. In fact, I suggest to people when they get a new hire, one of the things I suggest is go have a 5-minute, request a 5-minute talk with the boss and say, I only need 5 minutes. I just want to know what your values are and what you really want to see accomplished in here. And I just also want you to know that if I can add value to you in any way, if you need to call somebody on the weekends to do something for you, you can't get anybody else to do, just call me. And begin to serve that person without a selfish agenda, but begin to serve that person because you really do want to add value to that individual. Leading up becomes a much easier thing to do than if you're just constantly saying, well, I'm in the middle, and how in the world am I going to get out of this place to go somewhere else?
You know, if you're good at leading up, you probably have a good relationship with the Lord. Because what is the most important leading up relationship? It is with Him. Because our whole means ought to be to glorify His name. And, so you get good practice on that. And if you would think about, how would you deal with the Lord? Eleanor has her own style. Pulled him right into the car and talked to him, but I think it's the same concept because he's really teaching us by that because he really wants us to be on his team.
Yeah. I want to pose a question to John and then I'm going to come back to Ken about something else. But John has had a very interesting transformation in his life because now he's mostly in the business community and sees business people differently now than when he was a pastor. And we had a dinner together not long ago, and we had this conversation, and he said, I have some deep, deep regrets how I treated business people when I was a senior pastor. And wonderful conversation about that. I wonder if we can recreate part of that here. Now that you have a view from the other side, what would you do differently if you could do it again?
In my book, Winning with People, I have what I call the exchange principle that says instead of putting others in their place, put yourself in their place. And when I no longer pastored, Bill, but I became, quote, out of the pastoral ministry and began to go in the business community, I saw things entirely different. And then I began to really feel great regret in my own life because I see so many failures. I see so many things I wish I would have done a lot better. For example, and there are many, but maybe one or two. One of the things I wish I would have done is I wish that I would have had a better strategy and a better equipping strategy for business people. I got them in the church, and I love business people, but a lot of times they were very high-capacity people, and I would put them in what I call low-capacity ministries. And I wasn't really getting the best out of them, and it was a huge mistake. Instead of putting high-capacity people in high-capacity ministries and on boards and key positions where they could think and really help me strategize. I one day it hit me. I had a guy that was an independent, very wealthy business guy. He was a builder, and he came to me. He said, "John," he said, "I'm so excited." He said, "I'm going to sell my business, and I'm going to be the head usher in our church." And I thought, "Oh, John, you idiot." And I realized the only reason he thought that was great is because I hadn't stretched him in his field where he was, and it was just a huge mistake in my own life. And so, as I'm out there with business people, I would put much more emphasis upon helping them find their spiritual gift. And then one of the things I'm doing, in fact, I'm developing a strategy right now because although I'm in the corporate community a lot, I still have Equip and enjoy stewardship services, which helps churches raise money. So I'm still in the church also, and I'm a teaching pastor down in West Palm Beach. So I'm in both worlds. And one of the things I'm doing with the business people in West Palm Beach at Christ Fellowship is I'm helping them to get a scriptural verse, and then showing them how whatever their lifetime verse is, Bill, how they can relate it to the Great Commission. In other words, okay, now this is the verse that really gives me passion in my life. Now, what can I do now to relate it to the Great Commission so that I can help be part of this harvest for the Lord Jesus Christ? And I just wish that I would have given them more attention and probably encourage them to get back out there into their realm of influence and sphere of influence. Sometimes I think we try to take them out of there, bring them over there, and equip them in our side. I would have equipped them more where they were. I would have spent more time with them on the job. I would have developed a strategy for them on how to connect with their friends better so that they could lead them to Christ. And I would have understood that the importance of ministry of a local church is not only just what happens on Sunday, but it's what happens on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. Okay.
And Ken, I'm going to ask you the question. You used to be in the business world all the time, and now you're spending more time with pastors. And what's your observation of how well pastors are doing in their leadership? Do you think there's massive need for improvement? You think when you started working with pastors, you're like, hey, they were doing a little better job than I thought? Where are they doing well? Where do they need some attention, just sort of generally speaking?
Well, Bill, one of the observations I made early is that we as Christians have the worst business model in the world. Let's, for example, say there's maybe 1,200 churches in suburban Chicago that have Jesus as central to their teaching. And suppose I wanted to sell a great product, which is Jesus, the greatest master of the art of living and leadership. And I wanted to have 1,200 franchisees. And the 1,200 franchisees never talked to each other. They competed with each other. They criticized each other. And all. That is stupid. I see missionaries over competing with each other. Why don't they say, here's a country, who's got what covered, why don't we work together? Because we're all working for the same thing, Jesus. And the reason, my holy discontent was that I don't think we're all raising Jesus up. I mean, he's there, it's not us raising him up. He's there. We got to acknowledge he's there, raise him above the walls of all these churches, and stop this ridiculous, stupid fighting over ritual and rules and regulations. And You know, and so my big dream with Lead Like Jesus, and go to our website, leadlikejesus.com, is if we could help people understand that leading like Jesus is not only Jesus' mandate, but you can kill the competition with that, whether you're in a church or wherever you are, and that if we can do that, we could maybe find something common with all of us, because we all want to lead like Jesus, and then I think we all want to act and live like Jesus. I just get so discouraged when I see the bickering and the foolishness when we have the greatest relationship. I mean, why am I a Christian? I mean, I started really in the whole personal growth movement, you know. I mean, I studied under Warner Earhart, you know, Tony Robbins, you know, Wayne Dyer, Deepak Chopra, you know, all these guys that I just thought were fabulous guys, and I learned so much about my life until Bill and all showed me that the problem with that is you're depending on yourself and you're acting like it's all about you. And Bill said to me, Blanchard, I don't know why you haven't signed up a lot sooner. You get 3 consultants for the price of 1. You know, you get the Father that started it, the Son that lived it, and the Holy Spirit's the day-to-day operational manager. And so, you know, I mean, I came a whole different route. I didn't study religion. I was trying to make my life and other people's lives better. And man, I pushed all of the personal growth stuff as hard as I could, and became great friends with all those people. And then I found Jesus, and I said, wow, you add him to your team, and the rest is history, you know. And so, I mean, that's what, you know, has been hard for me to see, is that we aren't united. It's fine that you all have your different club rules and everything and all, but, I mean, we got the man.
Yeah, club rules. Yeah, club rules. Okay. Hey, Jonh, you're in situations now where you give talks to business leaders, and then at the end of a full day with a Fortune 500 company, you still have something in you that wants to point them to Christ, but you certainly have to be careful how you do that. And I'd like for you to explain to us, with this burning desire inside of you to help people cross the line of faith, come into a relationship with Christ, but the knowledge that you have to respect people's belief systems in a business, how do you handle that now when you're speaking to business people?
Well, the key word in the Christian community is relationships. I mean, we're brothers and sisters in Christ. We connect. So when I come to you or you come to me, because of what Jesus has done in our lives, we immediately have a relationship. It's kind of like kumbaya time, you know what I mean? Let's hold hands and kiss, okay. I'll see you at the break. We'll do kumbaya. In the business community, the key word is respect. In the business community, you do not get a relationship with someone until they respect you. And you're talking about what would I change as a pastor. One of the things I would tell people in helping in evangelism, training, and teaching them how to share their faith, one of the things I would tell them is go back to your work and don't share your faith until you get the respect of your peers. It does no good to tell everybody about Jesus when they don't respect you. So when I go in, Bill, to the corporate community, I'm going in there with an agenda to help this company really do what they need to have done. So I spend a lot of time with their leaders of the organization. What do you want me to do when I come in here? And I get the direction, get the game plan. And then my goal is to go hit the ball out of the park. Absolutely. Hit the ball out of the park. Add value to them. Again, if we're really going to make a difference as salt and light, and we're really going to engage with people, we've got to add value to where they are before they're going to listen to us. And so I go for the respect thing. Now, sometimes there's an opportunity that comes up. I was speaking to a major company in Wisconsin not too long ago, and the CEO, who wanted an hour conversation with me, said, Jonh, I know your books. He said, talk about your values. He said, I want you to talk about your values. And I said, okay. I said, how far do I press this? He said, I want you to know it's a secular company. And he kind of drew the parameters for me, and I stay right within them. There are times that I get the opportunity to do what I love to do, and that is sometimes when there are conferences, leadership conferences that are just for the business community, but not one like corporation sponsored it. You follow me? And I can go in, and at that point, I do what I call a volunteer session. I'll teach them all day and give my best to add value to them, and I'll say, then I just want you to know that we're going to be done at 4:30, and we'll take a 5-minute break. Please feel free to go, but if you want to stay, I'll talk to you about my relationship with God, and it'll only be a 10-minute sharing time, but don't feel under any obligation. And now that's kind of gotten out that I do that, and I just finished. I was in Asia. Can I tell us one quick story? It won't take long. After seeing what Curtis did yesterday, I just want to kind of add value here a little bit.
Am I going to have to call my counselor after this, too?
No, although Ken did want us to both wear red berets this morning. We thought we'd put you in shock when you saw us. I was just doing a 30-day trip, Margaret and I, and a few of the people were in Asia, and we were in Thailand, Bangkok, 80% Buddhist, and so I was teaching leadership, pure secular conference, and at lunch, one of the sponsors came to me and said, "Now we here in the States sometimes you have a volunteer session," and he said, "We would like to get everything we can. We're paying you the bucks. We'd like to get everything we can. Would you do this volunteer session?" I said, I don't really think you want that. and he said, well, tell me about it. And so I said, it's a volunteer session because I don't want to in any way offend anybody, for people who want to hear my relationship with God. And he said, well, I think we want that. And I said, I really don't think you do. I said, Go talk to the other people, that brought me here. And at the break this afternoon, if you still want it, you come back and talk to me, and I'll be glad to do it. But I said, it's got to be 100%. And during the break, he said, we really do. We still want it. And so there were about 1,700 people in that session. And so I told them what I was going to do. I said, they've asked me, and we'll close at 4:30, and we'll take a 5-minute break. Please feel free to go. What was interesting, the ambassador from Qatar, the richest nation in the world, Arab nation there, was on the front row, and I had struck up a relationship with him. And so during the break, I went to him. I said, "Now I'm going to be sharing my faith. I just want you to know this, and please feel free to leave. It's been great, and we're going to do some things together in a couple of countries over there with him." And so I said, "Just feel free to leave." And he said, "No, if you're going to share your faith, I want to hear it." So anyway, let him go. 80% of those people stayed. And I sat on a stool, and I drew 4 pictures of God. And I can just tell you that some of my greatest moments as a follower of Jesus is sitting on a stool in front of people who don't know, and sharing about if they get a right picture of God, how they can have this relationship. And so with this congregation that would be mainly Buddhist, I shared this very simple thing. And I looked out, and if I saw tears in the eyes of one person, I saw tears in the eyes of 100 people. And I shared my faith, and then I prayed a very simple prayer, and then I just let it go. And after it was over, there were people who were signing books and stuff like that. And I had person after person came to me and said, "I prayed that prayer." And the next day, Margaret and I had an extra day there, so we were doing a little sightseeing. And one of the sponsors was with us and gave us a little tour. And at noon at lunch, he said, "John," he said, "the phone's been ringing off the hook this morning in our offices." And I said, "Is it good?" And he said, "Oh," he said, "it's very good." Yeah, I thought maybe they're getting a lynch mob together, do I need to go to the airport now? Is there something I don't know? And he said, "Well, what's interesting?" And he says, "Most of the calls are about people that prayed that prayer yesterday." And I just say this to you. Just follow the Lord and do what he wants and obey him, And there'll be times as a leader you'll get really criticized for it. And they won't understand why you do what you do. But remember what Bonhoeffer said, a disciple of Jesus isn't always sure where they're going, but they know that they're following Jesus. And just stay real true to that and be the man, the woman that God calls you to be. And I think that he'll use you. So we use the volunteer station, and we find on the average in the States or internationally that 80% stay. And in the States, I asked for business cards of people that prayed. And so we collect them on the way out so that we can give them to churches in the community so that they can obviously follow on, because, if they don't get to a local church, probably it will be seed that won't really flourish. So we do that, and we find that about 80% of the people stay, and we find that 15% of the 80% that stay pray to receive Christ. And so this year I've led more people to Jesus than I led in any 5 years when I was a pastor to the Lord. And so I'm just very grateful. And
Now, here's what I'd like to do as we kind of draw this session to a close. I'd like to lead you in a time of prayer, because I really think that God is leading and moving in the lives of many of you. I think the Spirit is whispering, and I think there's this growing sense that some of you probably need to be leaving the place where you are and moving toward the place where the Spirit of God wants you to go. And these are very, very dangerous prayer times. They can cost you everything, and they can lead you into a new horizon, a new era of your life in ways that you have never imagined. And I know some of you are not Christians yet. You came to this conference because you knew leadership was going to be taught, and maybe your employer or a fellow employee dragged you here. And I hope there's been value added to your experience. But it might be time for you to move from your place of just peeking at Christianity to actually opening your heart and opening your life up to the redemptive work and to the leading, the guidance of our great God. So we don't have many times like this in fast-paced lives that we all live. Usually we're just rushing from here to there. We're rushing when a session ends. Well, we built in a little time in this session, and all three of us are going to pray. And I'm going to ask Ken to pray for those of you who were just like he was some years ago, outside the family of God and wondering if becoming a Christian would be the right thing. I want Ken to pray for seekers and to challenge you to give your lives to Christ. Then I'm going to ask John if he will pray for those of you who need to be moved from one place, from one arena to another. And then I'll do the closing prayer as God leads me. But just bow your heads for a moment and clear your mind. Realize what's at stake here. And as we said in the opening session, so much can happen when the Spirit of God whispers. I'm asking you in all the sites to join us in this experience, to just put down whatever's on your lap maybe and just relax for a second, take a deep breath and say, the next few moments, we're going to spend time with God. So again, just to make it clear, Ken's going to pray that some of you will open your lives to Christ right now. Not in a pressurized way, but just in a simple, sincere way. John will pray for those who might need to take a courageous step. Then I'll close. So just quietly join us in this prayer.
Dear Lord, this is such a special moment, and I pray that you just be with us as we consider how we can have you as our friend, have you as our partner. And for those of us like me who had so many doubts and just didn't think that God added much value until I met Jesus. And Lord, help us all to pray every day, Lord, clean me out of me. fill me up with you, and then clothe me with humility. Because that's really what we need, is humility, to take you into our lives, to realize that 1 + 1 with you is like, I can't even think the number. And not to be afraid of you, because you love us. You showed that in so many different ways, particularly sending your son here to die for us and to invite us into a partnership with him. And I know, Lord, if we can just open our hearts up to you, that we will have a different life. And every morning now that you're in my life, I start off by saying, Daddy, what are we going to do today? Because I think it's in the spirit of a child that we open ourselves, because young kids just want to be with their parents. They don't care where you take us. And I know you don't want to bring us harm. You just want to bring out the magnificence in us. So God, be with us as we all consider our relationship with you.
Lord, I pray right now for men and women who love you with their heart, mind, soul, and strength. They've been following you. But all of a sudden, it's the turn. It's either been surprising or intimidating. There's a tendency for us, Father, to always step back and to hold on to that which we know, that which we care for, that which we are comfortable with. And I would pray, Lord, that you would teach us what was recorded in the first miracle, Lord, at Cana at Galilee, when your mother looked at the disciples and the servants and said, whatever Jesus says to you, do it. Father, help us to understand the secret of our walk with you is obedience. And too many of us are educated way beyond the level of our obedience. So give us a simple childlike faith and dependence on you. And as we get stretched out of our comfort zone, God, may we learn to trust in you. There are trade-offs that we make in our leadership life. And seemingly the higher we go, the more difficult those trade-offs are. And I think, God, sometimes we miss the best that you have for us because what we're holding on is so important to us. We can't not imagine letting go of that and something being better. Today, may we with holy discontent and reckless abandon give it up. Give it up so we can go up. And may we really understand, Father, that to trust and obey, there's just no other way to be happy in Jesus but to trust and obey. And give courage, Lord. Give courage to us. Because these surprise moves and these stretches in our lives not only take us out of our comfort zone, but others around us sometimes do not understand, and we're criticized and we're questioned. God, help us to understand that when we are following you, that's enough. That's enough. And I just pray that you would give that courage to men and women today in this simulcast, that they'll step out. Just like in the skit today when Peter got out of the boat, or when Jesus asked them to go collect what they had out there. God, give us the courage to do what we know to do today, to walk in the light that we have today. In the name of Jesus, I believe that there are literally thousands of men and women just now settling those issues in their life, and I give you praise for that in your name.
Now, while your heads are still bowed here and at all the sites, I want to say a prayer for leaders under pressure and you know who you are. Those of you in the middle of a challenge spike, a very difficult situation, something that's weighing on you very, very heavily. And I'd like to ask, so that I can really do this in a focused way, I'd like for all of you in all the sites, if you're a leader who's under pressure right now, would you just stand to your feet? Stand up right now. Don't hesitate at all. If you just say, man, I'm in a rough patch right now. I feel a lot of pressure in my life. And it's me, oh Lord, standing in need of prayer. Standing in need of prayer. At all the sites, just stand to your feet as hundreds are standing to their feet here in South Barrington. And then I want to say a prayer. I mean, I understand. I don't have a judging spirit about anyone who's under pressure. This has been a pressurized year for me. So with all of you standing, if there are people around you now that can just kind of reach out and put a hand on these folks. If you see someone standing around you, just put a hand on someone so that they feel the connection all over the summit. Anyone around you that's standing up, if you could just reach out and put a hand on them so they feel the blessing, the touch of someone else who cares. Then I'd like to say a prayer. Would you join me now? Oh God, I lift these people up to you. I know the pressures of leadership. I know when we're in challenge spikes. I know when there's division. I know when things aren't going well in the family. I know when we have financial pressures. I know when there are staff issues that are so complicated. I know when we're behind on finances. I know when we're being criticized, fairly or unfairly. I know what all that feels like, and I know so many times when I would have been the first one to stand up and say, it's me, oh Lord, standing in the need of prayer. And there are men and women standing all across these sites. And all the rest of us right now reach out to them in prayer, and we ask you, God the Father, the one who can touch and who can bring hope, the one who can strengthen, the one who can cause a breakthrough in a leader's life. Oh God, we ask you to make a breakthrough in these dear lives. A breakthrough of hope. A breakthrough of peace in the middle of the storm they're involved with. A provision that they need desperately. Oh God, open the windows of heaven. Surprise us with your providing power. Some of these folks need a person to come alongside them for some assistance. God, bring someone alongside if that's the need. Some need marital reconciliation. Oh God, bring a reconciling spirit. Some have a wayward child and it's eating them alive. Bring the child home. But God, when we're feeling under pressure and we have nowhere else to turn, we turn to you. We look to you. We trust you. We trust you. We trust you. And Father, I pray even now, because we've collectively, tens of thousands of us, surrounded our brothers and sisters in need, I pray that the peace that does pass human understanding will rule and reign in greater measure in the lives of those that we care for and have supported in this prayer. And we pray this prayer in Jesus' strong name, and everyone all across the summit said, amen.